Hi, everybody, and welcome to English Digest. I'm Pat.
And I'm Elsie.
And today we're looking at a topic-based writing unit on a time I was deceived. So this unit is all about sometimes somebody tricked you, deceived you, whatever. Now, this could be in a sort of light-hearted way, or it could be something a little more serious and possibly criminal. Has something like this ever happened to you?
Yeah, you know what? A couple months ago, someone or some sort of group tried to scam me. So they called me and they told me that there was something wrong with my online shopping account. So they said, you'll need to go to an ATM and transfer some money to us so that we can know that it's really your account and we'll try to solve the problem for you. After hearing that part, I just hung up the phone.Okay.
Yeah. I have been taken in by a scanner once. Now, this was in the UK, and there was an advertisement in like the newspaper going around to say like a casting agency was coming to the city, and they were just looking to get kind of photos and a little short video of people, and they would use that as a sort of like, okay, maybe we can cast extras for TV shows, for commercials, that sort of thing. Now, with my background as an actor, I thought I would like to go and get involved in this. Now, if I was a bit older, I would have realized that, hang on, you shouldn't need to pay this much of a fee to get some pictures and stuff done like this. So I think I'm fairly certain that this was a group of scammers and they just took money off people, didn't have to, they had to just pay to rent a building and some camera people, maybe just produce a few very simple prints on a CD, digital photos, but otherwise they just keep everybody's money. They don't do any trying to get you cast in anything.
Oh, so you got the phone call, but you didn't really go do it, right?
I went there, I took the photos, I got the video,
you did?
I got a few sets of photos out of it, but nobody ever cast me in anything. And so I think I ended up reading, okay, this was a scam. This was just people taking people's money, feeding on their dreams of like, I could get in a movie or a TV show, and then that's it.
So they paid you a very small amount of money,
No, they didn't pay me any. I paid them.
You paid them?
Yeah, to do... Now, you'd normally
just
pay somebody
or a lot?
for professional photos or something. But I think this was just like a scam to take advantage of people who thought they could be in movies and TV. And so, yeah, I learned from that. And that's the whole point, learning from that.
Yep.
And we'll see this in our articles. The instructions for this topic are to write about a time you were deceived. The suggested outline is to have the first paragraph be about how you were deceived and how you felt at the time. The second should contain what happened after you realized, how you dealt with it, what happened after, what you learned, and so on. And you need to write at least 120 words.
今天的提示呢，说到的是生活中有关大大小小的欺骗事件，时有所闻。请你写一篇短文描述你被欺骗的经验。那文分两段，第一段描述你遭受欺骗的经过，跟你当下的情绪。所以事件经过跟你的情绪都要写进去第一段里面哦。第二段呢，要描述事发后续，以及你如何面对并且接受自己受骗的事实。那文长至少是120个单词。那接下来我们要注意到的是，什么是叙述文？叙述文是一种运用非常广泛的文体，常常出现在大考的作文题目当中。那常见的类型有：第一种，描述经验或是事件；第二种，描述物品；第三种就是描述人物。那依照题目的要求，本篇写作是关于自己受骗的始末跟后续的发展，属于是描述经验或事件的叙述文。
So this is a narrative, a collection of related events formed into a story. And like any story, it needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. A narrative should also show how the main character, in this case you, feels about what's taking place. Now, you'll want to start this story at the start and move forwards in time. There are other story structures. You can see them in movies and books, but let's stick with simple ones for now, and we can learn to master those before we get complicated.
接下来叙述文要写什么，而且怎么写呢？那一样，英文作文的架构基本上分为引言、主体还有结论，所以本篇叙述文你也要以这样的结构来发展。
So I mentioned a start, a middle, and an end for the story, but we also need to put an introduction and a conclusion to our writing sample to get the topic introduced and let the readers know what they'll be reading. And then at the end, we need to put a final thought at the end of the story.Introduction
是文章的引言，那说明的是文章要探讨的主题跟动机，就是我们的第一段的位置。那全文的主旨句呢，它常会在这边点出来。那在描述经验的文章当中 Introduction 除了可以是像这次基本写作当中直接破题之外，你还有以下几种的写法，像是第一个，在这个经验发生前，你对它抱持是什么样的看法，你可以先写出来。或是第二个，一般人对于此经验的看法是什么。第三个就是事后回顾此经验的时候啊，你的体悟跟感受。那我们的进阶范文就是用第三种来写的。
Your introduction should be short and straight to the point. The thesis statement here isn't really a thesis, just an idea of what the story is going to be about. Keywords like deceive, trick, fall for something should be in the first sentence or two to set the tone. But don't do a big, long introduction to set the scene. This isn't a novel. We need to get to what happened after a sentence or two. Use the introduction to give details, such as when this happened, how old you were, where the story will take place, and then you can introduce these ideas straight away.
接下来到 body 的部分，那就是文章的主体，必须要叙述许多相关的细节，也就是 supporting details。那细节呢，当然要和主题相关，要使主题生动，让人家印象深刻。在叙述整个经验的过程当中，可以依照事件发生的时间顺序来描述，也可以用倒叙法。那在时态的选择上面呢，因为是描述已经发生的事件，因此通常以过去式系列为主。那另外要特别注意的是呢，整篇文章的时态必须要是一致的。
Since this is about us, we'll be using first person. I believe this. I feel this. And you'll want to use past tense as you're telling a story about past events. You could use present perfect and past perfect when it's appropriate. And in the second paragraph, you could also use present tense in terms of how you feel now, what you do now, so you won't get fooled again.
所以呢，我们要用到的是第一人称来做叙述，因为这是关于你自己的经验。那再来，我们还要用到这个5个 WH， 还有一个 how， 像是呢何时发生，我们用 when， 何地发生用 where， 参与者为何人，我们用Who 为什么会发生用 why 如何发生用 how 那事件最后如何收场结果是什么那就是 the result 或是 consequence 那最后呢事件发生过程中还有事后的启发你自己有什么样的感受那就是 how you feel or how you felt 那这个呢你可以把它们放在一起变成你这一篇作文的架构
So the body is all the story. Follow the right chronological or time order. Now, you maybe got some of your 5W1H details in the introduction, but if you didn't, get them in at the start of the body. And also make sure you tell it like an interesting story, just like when you read a real story. And you can exaggerate some of the details. You're not reporting the news here, so bend the truth a little bit. Make some interesting details up to make your reading more exciting to read.
最后到了 conclusion 的部分，那就是文章的结论了。在描述经验或事件的文章最后，你可以举出因为有了这个经验，你才开始出现的行为或是想法，以说明这次事件为自己带来了什么样的改善与影响。
Your conclusion can maybe sum up the whole experience or say how it has changed you, or you can restate what made it such a memorable experience.
接下来到了 brainstorming 的部分了。受骗的经验呢，其实就是有点像是电影情节般哈。受骗前呢，你会有若干的事件作为堆叠，然后引发整起事件的最高潮，也就是受骗事件发生的当下，那就是故事的最高点。那事后呢，又会有几件事情发生来作为回应，然后再引向收尾的部分。
So another way to discuss this kind of structure is with something called Freytag's pyramid. It's a common structure for stories, plays, and movies. Of course, there are a lot of different structures, but this is a well-known one, and it follows, or it states that there are 7 key steps in successful storytelling. You start with exposition, which is setting the scene. You have an inciting incident to start the action, rising action as things get more exciting and complications occur, a climax, the most exciting part or the part with the greatest tension. Then there's falling action. More things happen. They're not quite as exciting. We're wrapping things up and characters show how they have changed. You have a resolution of what happens with the main characters. The problems are solved. And the denouement, or final conclusion.
这边说的 Freytag's Pyramid 这个金字塔大部分呢就是在说明这个故事发生到当下到高潮到最后结尾的顺序，所以第一个是阐述说明，再来是情节的攀升，最后到故事高潮，再来下降，最后到结果。
So we're not following that structure exactly for what we're doing with our magazine article, but we're pretty close to it with the diagram in the magazine. As you can see, it starts off, it gets more exciting, the tension gets higher, it reaches a climax around number 6 in our diagram, then you have the falling action 7 and the resolution and denouement at 8. And we can fill in these steps for both narratives from our samples. So for basic, we've got step 1, friends invited me to a restaurant. That's the exposition and inciting incident. We've got no one was there when I arrived at 2. I checked the time and address. That's 3. I kept sending my friends messages at 4. I was angry and decided to go home. 5. This is rising action. Then we've got 6. My friends ran out from a nearby store. It was a trick. This is the kind of climax. I found out it was April the 1st at 7. I found it funny and laughed with them. That's the falling action and conclusion. Denouement.
OK， 所以从1到8你会发现一开始在铺陈剧情，然后中间到了故事的高潮，最后再到结尾的部分，那是类似我们刚刚说到的 Freytag's Pyramid。
So the advanced sample, we start with I met Mark, a boy sitting next to me. That's kind of exposition and the start of the inciting incident. 2, he seemed funny and he told me about his rich family. 3, I told my other friends how great Mark was. This is sort of slow rising action. 4, I met Mark's old classmates and they told me Mark liked to make up stories. So this is up to rising action. I felt disappointed and embarrassed. At 5 and 6, I told Mark to leave me alone. That's our climax. The decision is made. 7, I forgave him in the end. And 8, our friendship never recovered. That's our resolution, falling action, and denouement.
在这个进阶范文当中呢，你会发现它前面的铺陈比较长比较久，那其实你会发现不管是基础范文还是进阶范文，大致上都是跟着我们提到的这个金字塔的结构在走的。
So note that these 8 steps in our diagram and the 7 stages of Freytag's pyramid, they don't have to match up exactly. It's not a one-to-one relationship, and the steps of Freytag's pyramid blend together as well. You're never quite sure when the rising action hits the conclusion. It's sort of it flows, it's not a step. But you get the general idea of how to do the story. Something happens, action gets rising, there's more tension, you hit the exciting point, and then you kind of go back down again. So let's now put this into the right order of sentences. Of course, we connect them and add them in more details later, but we've got to have an outline. Paragraph 1 starts with the introduction. This is our basic sample. I remember one time when I was tricked. So this introduces the general topic and using the keyword tricked. A very clear introduction to what this piece of writing is going to be about.
主题句带出有一次被欺骗的经验，非常的简单明了易懂。那接着就会开始描述它的 details 细节的部分。
Yeah, we have one other detail about the story. It was when I was in the 9th grade. So we have a when and a where, and we already have a who. So this is the exposition stage of Freytag's pyramid.
Exposition stage 指的就是阐释说明的阶段，就是前面铺陈的阶段。
Okay, and then we start going up this pyramid. My friend A, my friends invited me to a restaurant, the inciting incident. When I arrived at the restaurant that evening, no one was there. That's rising action. C, I got the time and address right. D, I kept sending messages to my friends, but no one answered. E, I was really angry.
所以同学们要记得我们还是要符合作文题目中要你写到的内容。我们的第一段呢，还需要写出自己当时的情绪。所以这边呢，他写上的是 I was really angry。他说到自己当下是非常生气的。那接着到第二段，描述事发后续以及如何面对并接受自己受骗的事实。
So now we move to paragraph 2, the rest of the story, which is still body here. When I decided to go home, my friends ran out of a nearby convenience store. So this is the climax, the moment when the character makes a decision, becomes active instead of passive, and then something happens as a result of that decision.
Climax 指的就是故事最高潮的部分，那再来就要进阶到情节下降以及最后的 conclusion。Yep,
now we get into the falling action and resolution of the story. A, it was a trick. B, April Fools, they shouted, and I found it was April 1st. And C, I saw the funny side and laughed with them.
最后揭晓原来是愚人节，所以朋友们在捉弄他。那作者最后呢，就跟着朋友一起笑，所以你会看到他情绪上面的转变，从生气到开心，作者也是有把它形容出来。
And then we have the denouement of Freytag's pyramid as our conclusion. In the future, I'll always check the date when I'm invited to a party.
因为这次事件呢，以后被邀请的时候，我会再次注意日期。那这边就带出这次事件对他的启发。
So when you've got your outline, you can then add your details, extra details, words, transitions, and when you turn it, or in order to turn it into a full essay. Follow that logical, sensible time structure. Don't jump back and forth in time. Don't leave out any key details. That's why you do your outline first, because you can see what you might have left out or what you might have too much of. And it's much easier to fix your outline than it is when you write the whole thing and then realize too late, oops, I missed something. Do all of that experimenting and figuring out in your outline before you start writing your first sentence. So we're now going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be looking through the samples. Welcome back, everyone. We're now going to read through our samples, starting with the basic sample. I remember one time when I was tricked. It was a couple of years ago in the 9th grade of junior high school. My friends invited me to a restaurant for a party. I was really excited. However, when I arrived at the restaurant that evening, there was no one there. The restaurant was closed. I checked my phone and I'd gotten the time and address right. I kept sending messages to my friends, but no one answered. I was getting really angry. Then, just as I decided to give up and go home, my friends all ran out of a nearby convenience store, laughing loudly. It was all a trick. April Fools, they shouted, and I realized it was indeed April 1st. It was then that I saw the funny side and laughed with them. In the future, I'll always check the date when my friends invite me to a party. So here, we follow the outline that we did in our first part, in part B of this lesson, pretty closely, just adding the usual handful of transition words and phrases, adding a few extra details about feelings to fill out that outline.
这个基础范文呢，基本上都是跟着我们刚刚讲到的 outline 架构在走的。那提醒同学哦，时态上以过去式为主，特别是在叙述事发经过的部分。最后的启发，你要再用到现在或是未来也是可以的。
Okay, so our advanced sample is a bit more detailed, and the structure is slightly different, and we'll talk about that after we're done. But first, let's read through the advanced sample. One thing about growing up is that you discover that not everything is what it seems. I learned this lesson when I was in the 10th grade. Since I just started senior high school, I was in a class with lots of new students. I was sitting next to a boy called Mark, and at first I thought I'd made a great new friend. He was a funny guy, and it seemed his family was quite wealthy. He said he had a swimming pool and that his family frequently took trips abroad to exotic locations. I told all my other friends how awesome Mark was. Eventually, however, I met some students from Mark's junior high school, and they informed me he was notorious for making up stories to impress people. I was not only disappointed, but also embarrassed. I'd fallen for every lie Mark had told me, and what's worse, I'd repeated the falsehoods. I told Mark to leave me alone, and we didn't speak for several weeks. In the end, I forgave him, as I realized that it was as much my fault for being deceived as his fault for deceiving me. However, our friendship never recovered. I learned an important lesson about taking things people say at face value. I hope Mark learned something from the experience as well, and that he never tries to lie or exaggerate things in order to win people over in the future. So here, our inciting incident is when the writer meets Mark. Action rises until the climax, which is the start of paragraph 2, when the writer acts. Before that, we have the rising action, and after that is falling action. Now, the resolution is when the writer forgives Mark, even though their friendship doesn't really recover. But the denouement here is longer because the denouement talks about what the writer has learned and what they hope Mark has learned. So you can see here we've got a longer denouement than the first sample, and the falling action is not really as much.
那这边呢，要特别带同学们来看到第一段的第一句，他在这个开头的铺陈呢，也是更加吸引读者的。他说到啊，一件关于成长的事情，就是你会发现，不是所有的事都是他表面看起来的那样。那在刚刚我们介绍到 introduction 的时候呢，我们说他用到的是第三种，也就是事后回顾此经验时的体悟或是感受。那接下来呢，还是要再次提醒同学要善用转折词，这边用到像是 eventually 带出结尾，那当然也可以用到 in the end， 好，在我们的文章中也是有出现的。那作者呢，在第一段当中点出他有 learned a lesson， 学到一个教训。第二段最后他用到 I learned a lesson about something 来带出他学到教训的内容究竟是什么。
Now let's take a look at some of the vocabulary words and phrases from this more advanced sample. So Mark, this guy, talked about going on trips to exotic locations. Exotic is a word that means very different to where you come from and grew up. The things there seem very strange and new and cool. Coming from the UK, for me, somewhere exotic would probably be a tropical beach climate or somewhere dry like a desert. If you come from those places, an exotic climate might seem like the north of Europe with mountains and big forests.
Exotic 这个形容词呢，就是异国的，与你以往经验不同的。
So the writer thinks that Mark is awesome. Awesome means really cool, really great. It's the sort of thing when, that movie was awesome. The food here is awesome. That music show we went to last night was awesome. It's a pretty common word in today's sort of common language.
极好的，非常棒的，好在一般的口语或者是写作当中都很常出现。
So we then learn that Mark was notorious for lying to people about the things he has or has done or has seen. Notorious is it's a similar word to infamous. You are famous and you have a reputation, but not for something good. If a restaurant is notorious for not being clean, that means a lot of people know, that place is kind of dirty. If a person is notorious for their bad behavior, it means that a lot of people have heard stories about it.
Notorious 这个形容词呢，代表是恶名昭彰的。
So one thing that Mark was notorious for is making up stories. If you make something up, you create it, you invent it, you just come out with it, it's nothing true, it's all fake, and you've just created it out of your mind.
Make something up 那就是编造某个说法或是借口，当然也可以编造一个故事 make a story up.
and the reader has fallen for these lies. Now, fallen for has a couple of meanings. You can say you've fallen for a person, which means you've kind of got a crush on them. You've fallen in love with them. But to fall for a lie, a trick, that means you have been deceived. You believe what you have heard. You've fallen for the trick.Fall
for something 那就是对点点点信以为真。那如果是 fall for somebody 那代表你爱上那个人了。
And so the writer is saying not only has he believed everything, he's fallen for all these lies, he's repeated them. He has repeated the falsehoods.Falsehood is just another word for lie. Obviously, you've got the word false, and hood kind of is a fancy way of making something into a noun. So false is an adjective, a falsehood is a noun. So in other words, the writer has gone around saying, oh yeah, Mark's great, he's got a swimming pool, Mark's been to Dubai, all this kind of stuff.
Falsehood 这个名词在这边代表的是谎言。
Now, the word deceive we've used a few times. It's in the title of this article. To deceive somebody is to trick them. You make up something false, you lie to them, and you make them believe you.
Deceive 当然就是欺骗的意思了。主动的用法有，被动也是有的。所以我们今天的主题才是 A time I was deceived.
So when the writer heard what Mark said, he took it at face value.This is similar to the introductory sentence for the advanced sample, not everything is what it seems. If you take something at face value, you go, okay, this is what it seems to be, therefore, I will believe this is what it is. You're not digging deeper, you're not checking to see, wait a minute, is this actually real or not? You're just going with appearances. You are judging the book by its cover.Face
代表是表面，所以呢 take something at face value 那就代表你仅凭表面就信以为真。
So one thing that Mark is doing is exaggerating things. To exaggerate something means you make something sound bigger or more impressive than it really is. The classic example is the fisherman. Oh, I caught a fish that was this big. It wasn't.
Exaggerate 这个字呢代表就是夸饰、夸大、说辞。
So why does Mark do this? He wants to win people over. To win somebody over, it could mean to convince them that your side of an argument is right, like a politician would win voters over. He's convincing them to vote for him. But you can also use it to mean make people like you. You can win people over by being kind, by being nice, by being genuine, by really being yourself and showing that you are interested in other people. But Marx just wins people over by trying to make himself seem cool and great and interesting with lies.Win
somebody over 代表的是呢说服某个人，或者是这里指的是赢得点点点的青睐。
Okay, so quite a lot of interesting words and phrases to look at in that advanced sample. And it's also something that I'm sure that you will have encountered at some point in your school life. Somebody you meet for the first time telling you a few stories to make themselves seem cool. But really, are those stories true or not? Do be careful and take everything with a pinch of salt.Which is another way of saying, don't believe everything at face value. That is all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening, everybody. For English Digest, I'm Pat.
I'm Elsie.
And we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.